Hi, this is Community Buzz. We're lucky to be here talking about the upside of trees with Maggie Redfern, who's the Associate Director of Connecticut College Arboretum. And I have to say to begin with that my wife and I have been observing kind of a war on trees, and we like trees, and we are hoping to help trees defend themselves and talk about the positive things about trees. So that's what we brought you in. Just start off today, just tell us what the Arboretum is, and if you want to expand on what your background is too, that's fine.
Sure.
I'd like to know if there's a mission for the Arboretum.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for having me and talking about trees. I love talking about trees with anyone who's willing. The Arboretum is basically a museum for trees. It was established in 1931 as part of the botany department at Connecticut College. And over the years, this area where we're sitting today became focused on native trees and native plants. And when we say native, we mean plants that are indigenous to Connecticut. And we've expanded that definition a little bit to be the eastern deciduous forest. So trees that benefit the ecosystem within this range. The native plant collection, the historic part of the Arboretum, is about 30 acres. We have 750 acres total, which includes the 125-acre campus just across William Street, as well as several hundred acres of natural areas. And as for our mission, the mission of the Arboretum is teaching, research, public education, recreation. So we really encompass a wide variety of topics and areas that we get involved in, both with students and faculty here at Connecticut College, as well as the local community. We have students that are working on research projects here in the Arboretum this summer. We've had vegetation surveys that have taken place since the 1950s. Breeding bird surveys that have also taken place since the 1950s. And this research is ongoing every summer. We also have master gardeners and garden clubs that come here to learn about trees and see just a mature public garden. That's really what we are. The main focus of our landscape is to provide a place for people to come learn about trees and landscaping and ecology.
It seems like a pretty great resource for this community in London and in the surrounding towns, but also for the region because it's really important. And you are a membership organization. We are members. I think we're
Awesome.
current. And I'd just like to put a plug in that people should consider joining the Arboretum to support it and to learn because you have great programs, classes, and all kinds of information that's available.
Right.
This coming year is really great.
Yeah. I mean, the grounds are open every day of the year from sunrise to sunset, and there's no admission charge. So we do appreciate people becoming members, and folks can also sign up just to get emails and find out about upcoming programs if they're curious and want to learn a little bit more before committing to becoming a member.
So why is native important? I know you're stressing native plants and trees,
Yeah.
and I understand the natural things that belong here, but talk a little bit more about why they're important as opposed to what.
Sure. So native plants, when the Arboretum was established, the idea was to grow the plants that are native to Connecticut. So the women of Connecticut College could just come across the street to learn about the plants of the forests and their surrounding area. So today, nearly 90 years later, over 90 years later, we're really understanding the importance of native plants to the ecosystem. We think about trees as being beneficial for the shade they provide, reducing urban heat island effects, carbon dioxide, carbon sequestration, all of the things that we think about trees being good for. They're also really important for pollinators. And the native trees that we grow have co-evolved with the insects of this area, and they've developed this relationship that's important for both of them. We need the insects to pollinate the trees, and many of the insects need specialized plants to eat and to lay their eggs and for them to survive as well. So it's this really important relationship. You may have heard about the decline in bees. You may have heard about the decline in bird and insect populations. And if you think about how much of our landscape is covered with plants that are not native plants, there's a huge loss in habitat for our insects and pollinators. And so if you think about the American lawn, for example, it doesn't support pollinators. It's great for absorbing stormwater, but it doesn't do much more than that. If we were to look, as Doug Tallamy, an entomologist out of Delaware, does at insects that visit trees and start to really understand and dive into this relationship, our native dogwood, the flowering dogwood, supports over 100 different types of insects. And the Kusa dogwood that comes from China doesn't support any. And we think, oh, I don't want insects on my plants, but actually we need insects for our plants. We need them for pollination, and we also just need them. We need them for the birds to survive. Caterpillars are one of the most important foods for baby caterpillars. That's how they get all of their nutrition as young. And if there are no caterpillars, there's no food for birds.
And how many of the pollinators actually pollinate other things that are economically more important, fruit trees and things that farmers depend on, crops? Is there much overlap?
Sure. Well, a lot of the pollinating in agricultural crops is taking place with honeybees. That's another insect that's actually been brought to the United States, so the honeybees. I don't know exact numbers in terms of urban crops, or of agricultural crops, in terms of our native pollinators pollinating those. But oftentimes farmers are growing plants that are native plants to attract pollinators to their crop areas, to their agricultural fields. There's a farm in western Connecticut that's been doing just this, and they're really trying to attract our native pollinators by creating fields around and rows around their crops that will bring the pollinators to their sites.
Because of global warming, I think probably native trees are changing somewhat. Native plants are changing.
Yeah.
It's getting warmer and winters aren't as hard. So
yeah.
Has the Arboretum seen that in their surveys? Because I know they researched this Arboretum pretty thoroughly.
Yeah.
A lot of years.
Yeah. So we are seeing changes in tree populations, and there's so many factors that contribute to that. So, like, hurricane of 1938 wiped out a ton of our hemlock trees. They started to grow back, and then hemlock woolly adelgid came in and destroyed many of the trees within our landscape. I mentioned the emerald ash borer. So there are these kind of invasive insects that are coming in and destroying some of our native trees. We're also seeing trees that are maybe not as tolerant of the hot, dry summers, and those trees are in decline, like some of the birch trees. But there are other trees that are from more southern United States, southeastern United States, that are doing well.
Not exactly.
I wouldn't say they're exotic exactly, because they are still benefiting pollinators, and pollinator ranges can be quite a bit larger than, the pollinators don't know the Connecticut state boundaries, right? So we actually think larger, like, ecoregions, and we think about like a slightly larger geographic area in thinking about what we consider native. So we're willing to assist with some of those trees coming up here and growing some of the more southern species just for those reasons.
Talk a little bit about your role at the Arboretum and I guess your work with the community.
Sure.
And the tree project and then other things the Arboretum does.
Yeah. So my role with the Arboretum is to plan and organize and lead many of our public programs. And as a membership organization that's open to the community, we offer lectures and workshops, guided tours. They're open to the college community as well as to the public. And we also have conferences for homeowners as well as professional landscape architects. Our homeowners conference is called the SALT Conference. Smaller American Lawns Today. Should have like a... Yeah, exactly. So that was, the idea of SALT was started by Professor William Nearing in the 1990s, although he had been living the SALT movement for many years. His idea was to reduce the size of lawn and to put in more environmentally friendly plants and beneficial plants, create shade, create privacy from your neighbors, and reduce the amount of fossil fuels used for mowing lawns, reduce the noise pollution from mowing lawns, and even more so these days blowing with leaf blowers and such. Dr. Nearing would have been very upset by the progression of how many leaf blowers we have in our communities. You know, he liked to be out in the garden on a Saturday morning and hear the rustle of the leaves and the sounds of birds.
And you have been working, actually, some of the other projects you do with the Arboretum?
Sure. So we have a professional landscape conference in conjunction with Larry Weiner, a landscape designer out of Pennsylvania, and this attracts usually, when we have it in person, over 200 people. Our virtual conference has brought in over 500 people. With all of these ideas of environmentally and ecologically beneficial landscapes. We'll talk about things like creating meadows, using fire to clear areas, landscape design, and this is more geared towards professional landscape architects and ecologists and city planners, but more and more people are getting interested in the subject and it's really attracting a wide audience. Yeah, and then in terms of like other public programs, when I moved to New London almost 8 years ago, I was really impressed by the diversity of trees in downtown New London. There aren't actually a lot of trees in downtown, but there's a pretty good diversity of trees. And so I started leading some tree walks just to be able to share some of the Arboretum knowledge with folks in downtown New London and just kind of open up our doors so that we could start exploring the community forest within New London.
That led to the New London Trees Group?
It did lead in a way that definitely led to the New London Trees Group. So the New London Trees Group evolved out of an inventory that we worked on. The Arboretum, former director Glenn Dreyer, who retired retired 4 years ago, has written a book on community urban forestry and kind of how we need to develop better community urban forests. And one of the things that he identified is the need for a tree inventory so the city knows what they have. And we wrote a grant with the city to inventory the street trees in New London. And we were looking at the municipal trees, so the trees along the streets, in parks, and in schoolyards, and hired two Connecticut college students to do the inventory, which they did in the summer of 2018. And just at about that time, the City of New London was working on installing new sidewalks. And on Plant Street, they were going to cut down a dozen mature trees to put in new sidewalks. And Isabel, the student who worked on the inventory and wrote a report about it, did a public presentation. And on one hand, we're talking about a decline of trees in New London, as was shown by the inventory. The inventory actually showed we had a loss of about 30% of our municipal trees since 1993, which is a huge loss. The war on trees, and it's not just people, environmental issues, pest diseases, also all sorts of things led to that. So Isabel gave this presentation, and folks were then like, we've lost all these trees. Why are we cutting down trees for sidewalks? And so we had a meeting at City Hall, a community meeting with the Conservation Commission, and a whole group of people that said, we can't be cutting down trees to put in sidewalks. This has happened too many times in New London. And so we started meeting monthly as a group, and during the pandemic decided to form as an official nonprofit organization. And we meet monthly and are working on planting trees in New London.
Talk a little bit about exotic trees and why they're not a good idea.
Sure.
What they are, I guess.
Yeah, so we refer to exotic trees as trees that are from somewhere else, far away places, and you know, I don't want to be saying that those trees are bad. If we have mature trees, they have many. Mature trees serve many functions for our ecosystem. Not to mention they're quite beautiful, and I think people just love big, beautiful trees in general. But as we're thinking about the limited resources that we have for planting trees, we're trying to focus more and more on planting native trees for the ecological benefits I mentioned earlier, so that they can support pollinators. They're also better adapted usually to the soils and the water conditions, the moisture conditions we have. We've had a very dry spring this year, but if you look around, you'll see that most of our trees and shrubs are actually doing quite well, and they're used to these fluctuations, maybe not as extreme as we're starting to see, but they are better adapted to the New England climate.
I guess what would you recommend people do for their own yards? I guess type of trees and why natives?
Sure. Well, with planting trees, we always like to think about the term right tree for the right place. And that means looking at the specific site where you're wanting to plant a tree. We need to know how much sun the site gets, how much moisture is in the soil, what sort of other conditions might be there. Are there overhead wires? Are there power lines? Exactly. So there's all these different factors that need to be looked at in making the decision. But we've put together a list for New London trees that identifies native plants in the small, medium, and large categories, and provides a description about the different trees so folks can get a better sense of what tree might be appropriate for their garden. With New London trees, we're looking into a program where we can plant trees in people's front yards. The City of New London doesn't really want the responsibility of maintaining large street trees. They're too close to the road for snow plowing, and they need maintenance and care over the years. So we're looking into this program where we can plant trees in people's front yards, and people will then take care of their own tree. And that means everything from watering and pruning at the young age of a tree to 100 years from now possibly needing to remove a tree. So putting that on the homeowner as opposed to on the city.
I guess one thing that I wanted to bring up that something you've already sort of addressed is I was on the planning commission for 24 years in Groton, and they're fairly progressive, but a lot of times they're requiring trees for streetscapes on new subdivisions, and then Parks and Rec is doing trees. Do you work with them much to kind of keep an eye on what they're doing and make recommendations? Because I don't know if they go out looking for help or if they sort of winging it.
A little bit of both. So when planting trees, especially like street trees and streetscape trees, we aren't really focusing on those really small areas, 2 foot by 2 foot or 4 foot by 4 foot within sidewalks. We're looking at areas where we can plant trees where they have more green around them and can absorb more water and aren't in such the stressful urban conditions that most sidewalk trees are. So our first big project was planting trees down the median of Governor Winthrop Boulevard, which is kind of a gateway to New London. And we planted 9 trees in this area. It's several blocks long, and the strip is about 8 feet wide where we planted the trees, so they can absorb water and provide shade over the street. And this project actually came to us from one of our members, Mayor Passero, who's a regular attendee at our tree meetings. And so he's been helping to identify areas where we can plant trees. We also have the city tree warden who comes to our meetings. We haven't been as successful with the Parks Department. The Parks Department is Parks and Recreation, and they are a bit more focused on the athletic fields and the ball fields. But it is a hope to get more trees in our parks. We've lost a few ash trees in recent years from the emerald ash borer, an insect that has come through our area and devastated the ash tree population. So we've been able to replace a few of those trees, or much smaller versions of those trees, in our parks. But the ball fields would be a great place to have more trees around the perimeter. We do see on Saturday mornings, the park that's near my house, people are all clustered under the shade of a tree, and there just aren't enough trees to provide that type of shade around the parks.
And it sounds like you're not working right along the streets to do trees, because it seems like that's really important. And are the trees that will make it in a pretty small space and kind of rough conditions? And I'm thinking of parking lots too. Some of these parking lots are huge and they're hot, and if there is a tree, everybody tries to park there.
Yep. Yeah. So that brings up a project that the city did invite us to comment on, a municipal parking lot that was getting repaved, and unfortunately, many of the trees that surrounded that parking lot were exotic and invasive trees like Norway maple, and also a lot of running bamboo. And so they wanted to improve those plants, and so we've provided suggestions on plants that would do well in that area. Unfortunately, though, there aren't those nice large islands in the middle of the parking lot to be able to plant trees that would provide large canopy for the trees. There is one parking lot in New London that was completed recently where they did do that. And not only did they put islands in the center of the parking lot to grow the trees, but they created breaks in the curbs so that water could go in, and water would filter in and give water to those trees. So another great benefit of trees is their ability to absorb stormwater. And here in New London, being by the Thames River and Long Island Sound, we should be absorbing as much of our urban runoff as we can to clean it before it goes out into the larger bodies of water.
Where can people get native trees? Are they available?
That's, it's a really good question. It's a kind of it seems like an easy answer, right? Well, we don't want people going into the forest or coming to the Arboretum to dig them up. Native trees is something that we are advocating for, and we are working to try to get from our local nurseries to try to get more native trees to be supplied. But many of the trees are commercially grown, and they're cultivars of certain species, so they're just taking cuttings of trees and growing the trees that grow very quickly, as opposed to having seed-grown trees that have a real diversity of DNA within the trees. There are a few nurseries, and I think anyone who's interested in planting native trees, find the list on our website or look into and do some research on what native trees you might be interested in. Go to some of the local nurseries, because they do have some native trees, and I'm starting to see more and more sections and areas where native trees are planted, almost like there's the fruit tree section and the native tree section. But it's something that's going to take a little bit of time to really make that transition so that we have more native trees to choose from and maybe a few less exotic trees.
How much maintenance and care do they need when they get started? You're talking about landowners in London putting trees in their yards. How big an effort is it?
Native trees are similar to any other tree. For the first 1 to 3 years of a tree's life, it probably wants about 20 gallons of water a week. or a good inch of rain a week. And if it's not getting that, the tree's just not going to grow up to be quite as healthy and large as it would otherwise. So really important for the first few years is watering the tree. We also advocate for pruning the tree, getting rid of any of the crossing branches, and just really opening up the canopy so that the branches will grow to be, nice large canopy, as opposed to crossing branches that will cause structural problems in the future.
So if people want to know more about native, they can get a hold of you.
Sure.
And your website has information.
Yeah.
And anything you want to add to what we've talked about already? We're getting down near the end of the list.
So,
excited.
I enjoy growing trees from seed, and that's something that I enjoy doing here at the Arboretum is collecting seeds from our trees and going through winter treatment so that they will germinate in the spring. Many of our trees are adapted so that when they drop their seeds, they actually need a cold treatment before they will germinate in the spring. If you think about a tree just sending up a shoot and roots in the fall, it's probably going to die from the cold. So I teach a class every fall where we go out and collect seeds and talk about how to treat them. And usually in the spring we'll do a class on how to grow these seeds on. So it's personally, I think it's a lot of fun, and it's really neat to see the trees that I have growing in my own yard that came from seeds that I've collected. Really gives a new meaning to the trees that I'm caring for.
Where are you doing these classes? What group are you reaching?
We are working with a group called Wild Ones, and Wild Ones is another nonprofit group that's focused on planting native plants. It's a national organization, and the Arboretum sponsors the local chapter of Wild Ones. And they have free monthly public programs. Just advocating for native plants, and a really great group of people interested in collecting seeds and distributing seeds and also selling native plants. We will have another native plant sale here at the Arboretum in the fall. So.
It seems like the kind of thing you could get kids excited about, to actually grow something, because I'm not sure kids do that enough these days.
Yeah.
I was in 4-H, so I had a garden and I had chickens, and there was some really great experiences involved with that.
Yeah.
The kids need to have some of that, at least in their curriculum.
Definitely. And we've worked with the local elementary school on planting a couple trees in parks. And we're also just starting a relationship with the City of New London's Youth Affairs Office so that we can hire high school students to help us take care of and water trees that we are planting in New London. So that's, for us, that's a great way to involve youth and get them excited about potential careers for the future.
I guess I'll give you one more chance to promote something you're interested in, but I'm getting to the end of the list. What do you want to leave with our viewers?
Well, I think you had a good summary there for the end, right? We should all go out and plant a tree. I really, in my role here at the Arboretum, I feel like I am lucky to have the voice to speak for the trees, and so if anyone has questions about trees, I'm happy to answer them. They can reach me at the Arboretum, reach me through New London Trees. I try to answer everyone's questions, and I know everyone has kind of a unique situation, and there's a unique tree just waiting for them.
Well, this has been inspiring. I appreciate your helping us with this, and appreciate the Arboretum. So anybody who's watching, I hope you'll tune in to the Arboretum and take advantage of them and help them. And to the viewers, thank you for watching. Hug a tree, plant a tree, and be well.